Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek Russian T34 85 medium tank. Since the last video update, some progress has been made to the vehicle's top deck, and we'll be going over these additions and modifications in this video. So stay tuned because there's going to be a little bit of info coming right at you. Picking up exactly from where we left off from the previous video takes to the component that we have here. As a quick recap, in the last video I mentioned that I replaced the entire rear engine deck from the kit original with a brand new drop-in replacement that was 3D printed, and that's a component listed on the ECA catalog. Well, as I mentioned in that video, the next thing to focus on is the front section of the roof, which contains the turret rotation gear mechanism. And with the way the kit is designed, it's just like you see on most other Armortek tanks, where the top plate is designed to bolt to several brackets that are bolted onto the hull panels. And even though this system does work, at least for a rock-solid mounting platform, on my builds, I really like to make the top decks removable just for in case of access. If there's ever a emergency and you need to get access to the inside of the vehicle, it's much more easily done if the top deck is removed, as opposed to trying to work within the confines of a turret rotation hull. So that takes us to some modifications, and that's what we have right here. On these builds, I always like to use magnets to secure the top deck to the vehicle. It leads for a nice seamless appearance. There's no unsightly fasteners or anything along those lines that can hurt the look, and it just, makes things easier when you're doing the maintenance. You don't have to use a wrench or nothing of that sort. Just go ahead, grab the inner plate and just yank it upward and it gets removed. So it's a win-win across the board. However, the top plate still needs to be held on in a firm manner, and that's why I like to use magnets. The magnet modification does take a little bit of extra work because you have to, move outside the confines of the kit. You have to develop and fabricate some extra parts, but in the long run, it's definitely one that's worth it, which is why I incorporate it on all of my builds. So what we have here is my magnet mount. This is going to be secured to the front portion of the T34. With the way the kit is designed, there are two brackets that are present. One is on the front portion right over the driver's section, basically the entire front plate, and the other one is on the rear, and it makes contact with the rear bulkhead, and then it gets sandwiched on top of the engine deck. So I'm right now still working on the mount for the rear one, but here we have the front one. This is straight from the vise. I just finished the fabrication work. To fabricate it, this is as simple as I can possibly make it, where I'm going to recycle and reuse the front mount from the kit one, but I'm going to adapt it in order to now serve the function of holding the magnets. In order to do that, I use a piece of angle aluminum that we have right here. As you can see, I went ahead and drilled 3 holes. These ones are the mounting holes that are going to be recycled from the kit rather than securing the top deck to the bracket. Now that bracket is going to secure this mount to its underside. So the holes are going to be reutilized, and I just simply mark them and drill them out. Fasteners are going to be added to these momentarily. And then on the side portion over here, I drill 4 holes, tap them, and you can see I went ahead and fitted some cabinet magnets. The magnets that you see here are doubled up, which is great. It makes for a nice stronger type mounting system. And I like that they are low profile, and for this vehicle here, that's definitely going to be a bonus. To secure these in place, like I stated before, they are tapped. So I do have some fasteners right here on either side. As you can see right now, they are a little loose because I need to first affix the top plate in place, and then I could go ahead and adjust accordingly. There's a modification that needs to be done to the top plate that I'll touch upon in a moment, but regardless, you can see that they are secured in place here. When the time comes, I'm going to set the magnets where they need to go at the proper height, then tighten them down with some Loctite. That'll keep them in place, and at that point there, the magnet system is good to go. The reason why I utilized a tapped system for this as opposed to using a nut and bolt type system is because of simplicity. Trying to get back in here and hold the nut in place with some sort of tool while I tighten with a wrench, it's doable, but I've done it enough times to know there's a better way. So I drilled and tapped these sections. Yes, you do have to use a tap. Yes, it adds a little bit more complexity and a little bit extra time because it's an extra procedure, but it's one that will save time when it comes for the actual mounting and, most importantly, the setting. And here's the bracket being fitted to the front mount that I mentioned before. If I move the camera, you can see how it secures in place and how the original kit supply part is adapted now to fit the new magnet mount. Also, at this time, I'm about to put the last fastener in right over here, and you get to see the other modification required in order to do this setup. Here you get to see the other fastener right over here, as well as the one on the opposite side. In order for the top deck to fit on flush and to mount this piece in place, the fastener must be countersunk and recessed into the bracket. Otherwise, it's going to lead to some fit issues. So to do this, I use a drill bit right over here on my drill. And I basically just drill out the extra material required to add the well for the new fastener to fit in place. And this is something that some care and precision needs to be exhibited by the builder. You only need to drill partway through the material, just enough so that the countersunk fastener can fit in flush, or ideally below the surface. If you go too deep, you drill right through this piece of steel, now your life is, well, a bit harder. If you are careful, however, you'll be able to remove the necessary amount of material, and then the fastener can just drop directly in place. A countersunk bit can obviously do the same exact job. Unfortunately, I kind of misplaced it at the moment, so I was able to make do with just a standard drill bit. From here, I'm going to go ahead and mount the last fastener in. By the way, red Loctite is utilized on all these fasteners, of course. Once this piece gets on, you're not going to want to take it off again. And then from there, I could go ahead and get the top plate prepped so that I could go ahead and set these magnets now at their correct and final depth. And here we have the magnet mounting system right here on the back. This one's much simpler of a design. Rather than having to fabricate this aluminum bracket that we have here, for the one in the back that wasn't necessary because I already have a perfect flat mounting point right here with the upper hull bulkhead. I just drilled 2 holes directly into the piece, and then it's held in place with 2 fasteners that you can see right here, and a little drop of Loctite is going to be added once again everything is properly set. I was originally going to have 4 mounted on these 2 sections over here. However, I found that trying to drill into these sections is a bit more problematic compared to just the center one over here, and plus with the way the rear section is going to lock on in place, the extra mounting points weren't really that necessary. So from here I can now go ahead and adapt the top plate. With the magnet secured to the hull, it's now time to prep the top plate so that it could work with the hull mounted magnets. All of the Armortek kits that came after 2009 feature an aluminum alloy top deck, and obviously these are not magnetic. The previous generation kits were a little bit simpler when doing this modification because obviously you don't have to do any other mods because the top deck is made out of steel and the magnets just clip right to this steel deck. But the later versions, yeah, you have to do an extra step or 2. So that's what we have going on right here. Here you can see the steel plates being secured in place. These are the ones that come with the cabinet magnets, and it's nothing more than just a steel plate. The steel plates are just simply bolted to the top deck, which I'll touch upon in a second, but the one thing I do want to mention is a mod that you want to make to the plate itself. With the way these cabinet plates are designed, they have these 2 dimples found in these 2 sections over here, and these are intended so when you bolt this thing to the wood, it digs in, which is great for wood. Not so great when you're working with a non-wood type material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit these 2 sections here with the Dremel cutoff wheel, which will make them flat, and this will allow the thing to sit flush to the deck. Granted, you could just, mount it upside down like I could show over here, but I just like to go ahead and delete those knobs, just for a reason or 2. Basically, why not, shall we say. The other thing I want to mention is with the securing of the things themselves. You'll see that right now they are being bolted to the top deck, and I'm using countersunk fasteners that we have right here. Generally, these need to be plugged up with a little bit of bodywork and some sanding, and I'll touch upon that in a moment because I am going to be doing something special to this deck here that I haven't done to any of my other Armortek builds, so you definitely want to stay tuned for that. But regardless, you can see that in order to get these in place, I have to drill countersinks into the metal in order to get the fasteners to fit in. This is just like what I mentioned before with the steel plate. When you're drilling these out, you want to stay on the ball because you definitely don't want to over drill into the material. Just enough for the fastener to sit nice and flush, or in this case, you can see below the surface. And on that note, one thing that I always mention in these Armortek builds is that when you're doing these type of fasteners, it's actually best to have them sit slightly below the surface. A few engineers are going to come in and scoff at that, but this is done strategically. The reason why you want the fasteners to not sit totally flush with the deck but sit below is that this makes the bodywork much more easily done. If you have the fastener sitting completely flush with the deck, no matter how many times you add putty and sand this thing down, you are always going to have some sort of a remnant of the fastener that will be present. And this is something that will just drive you up the wall if you're trying to polish away. If they are sitting below the surface, this allows you to really plug on as much body filler as possible in this area over here, and body filler will sand down much more easier to a flush manner compared to if you have that stupid piece of fastener that's protruding upwards. So yes, that is a reason why I tend to oversink my fasteners found on specifically the external portion of these builds. On the inside portion, of course, red Loctite is utilized to keep everything in place. And as soon as the fasteners are added, I'm going to take a Dremel and I'm going to amputate the protruding sections of thread because you just don't want that on the inside of the vehicle. After that point, the magnet plates are now permanently secured. For the rear portion of the top deck, I was originally going to use magnets. However, I quickly found that that was not going to work just with the shape of the area I'm working with, as well as also with the location of the internal equipment. So I'm actually going to utilize a fastener to hold the rear deck in place, and that fastener is going to be concealed under the rear deck, so it's not going to be visible at all. However, for the actual mount itself, I'm actually recycling a chunk of bracket that was originally supplied for this model for use for another component that it's no longer necessary. So the piece is made out of steel, and I went ahead, cut it to shape, and I'm actually recycling the mounting holes. It kind of worked out in that way for securing this to the rear bulkhead, which we'll see momentarily. However, to help secure the top in place, the one hole was in a really precarious spot, and it's exactly where I needed the piece to be at. So rather than trying to drill another hole, which is it'll just bug me, I went ahead and recycled this location. To do this, I took a nut and I went ahead and I actually drilled a hole a little bit wider, and I was actually able to compress and squish this nut here into place. The hole is slightly smaller than the nut itself, so I was able to press fit it in with the use of the vise, as well as also with a hammer and a punch. Because the nut is a hex, it just, grabs into the steel, and it's not going to, spin or walk when it comes time to actually secure this thing in place. I'm actually running a tap through the section right now just to clean up the threads because of the compression process. It damaged some of the threads, so way to clean it up, just go a few passes with the tap over here, and the nut is now returned back to its full function. From this point here, I'm actually going to give this thing a shot of red primer, and then I'll be able to mount it to the model. With the last hole added in the back, it's now time to work on the top deck. There are some details that are going to be added to the top deck. I'm going to be mentioning that momentarily. However, before I do that, I do need to do some prep work. In the past, to plug up fastener location holes like this, I would go and add some body work and then sand everything down. And although I can technically do that with this one here, for this one I'm actually going to be utilizing a different technique because of the smaller size here of the top deck. Rather than going with the bodywork approach, I'm going to actually skin the entire top deck with a panel of styrene, which is basically going to cauterize everything, making for a nice flat surface, which will be perfect for adding on the last of the details. In order to do this, though, I had to revise the motor mount bracket. You can see here the two mounting fasteners that we have right here. And these were mentioned in a previous video. They did stick up on top of the deck, so in order to get the top deck prepped for the addition of the skin, I went ahead and just ground them down with an angle grinder. Now they are completely flush. This will be the perfect point to add the deck. So for the skin itself, made it here out of some sheet styrene. This is very similar to what I did to the rear engine deck. Slightly different reasons. And the unit's just going to drop into place. I still need to do some slight hand fitting here or there, but once this is added, it's going to leave for a perfect seamless appearance. The other thing that I want to mention is with the back section over here, this is where the rear deck will overlap and sit on top. So I wanted to have the piece have a flush look, which would be present on the real vehicle. And so by skinning the piece here with plastic and having the piece recess in, it's really going to do a good job with mimicking that. I did take some careful measurements to make sure that everything lines up appropriately. There still may be some hand fitting required once everything is glued in place. That's generally what happens, but this is something that can easily be adjusted after the piece is permanently secured to the deck, which I'm going to go ahead and take care of right now. So let's go ahead and cut across to when that has already been taken care of. And with the plastic laid over, you get to see what the top deck looks like now refitted back onto the vehicle. As you can see, it is a much cleaner appearance compared to before. And from this point now, we could continue with the remainder of the top deck details. As for what those are, well, I have those in this little Ziploc baggie that we have right here. These are new 3D printed components. Now, the ones that I have here in this bag are just pre-production samples. The actual production units are going to be a little bit more improved compared to these ones here, but these ones here should be more than suffice for the job at hand. Here you can see all the parts strewn out here on the top deck. These pieces here are all going to be offered on a single runner and are found on the ECA T34 parts catalog. As for what they are, not really sure what their purposes are, but the only thing I know is they are on the real one, so ergo they're going to be on the model. We have two types of axis plates. We have this one over here, and these are a mirror image, by the way. They have their fastener detailing integrally molded on. And then we have this version over here, which has this dome in the center. And note that it is cut in this type of format as per the real example I was using as research. And then we have these two smaller axis caps right over here. These are similar to the ones found on the underside of the intake grills that I mentioned in the previous video. Now that the top deck has been skinned, this entire area here is going to be upgraded with the addition of these parts. It's also because of these parts here why I went ahead and added the magnet lock system, is because with the way the kit is designed, we have the countersunk fasteners originally in these locations over here, and these are the exact locations where these pieces need to be fitted in place. So I could have went ahead and I was actually contemplating on just having these pieces just glued to the top deck with silicone or with some other type of temporary adhesive, but rather than going that approach, that's a bit more, I guess, rudimentary to go about it. It was easier to just go ahead and make the magnet lock system that I referenced before. Now with the magnets in place, fasteners are no longer necessary to hold the top deck in its location over here, so we could go ahead and detail it out with the various components. Here you get to see what it looks like with that rear section right over here. If I take the top deck, you can see how it overlaps and secures everything in place. This is going to be held in place with some fasteners on these two locations over here, but we also have that third fastener right there in the center portion, and you can see how this piece here just completely conceals it. So if you ever have to get access to this area over here, you first remove this section, remove that bolt, and then the entire piece just pops right off. Regrettably, I don't have the correct fastener on hand in order to show this piece in operation, but this is something that I have on order, and I'll be mentioning it in the next video update. And here you can see what the top deck looks like with the parts laid out. In addition to installing the 3D printed parts, I also went ahead and carved in the two little recesses right over there. If you notice, they continue on the rear engine deck area of the vehicle. Again, this was lifted from a real T34 that I was using as reference. From here, I can go ahead and get the unit completely in its coat of primer, and then we could progress to the next leg of the build. With the turret placed on, you get to see the clearance of the components in question, and you can really appreciate why those rear axis caps have the geometry that they do. And as you can see, they clear the unit absolutely perfectly. No matter how many times the turret is rotated, you'll never have to worry about these striking the bottom portion of the turret lip. While the top deck is going through its primer mode, one thing that I found luckily in the shop is this little guy right here, a countersunk M3 fastener. This is exactly the fastener that I was, well, there goes that. Take two. So here's the same fastener from before. Thank you, magnet on a stick. And we can go ahead and secure now the top deck in place. Just go ahead, line it up. Because it's a Phillips, it's really easy to get access to. And you just screw this bad boy in. Now you're going to be a little bit tempted to screw it in all the way till it bottoms out, but this is not a good idea, because what's going to happen, it's going to actually tilt the front end off of the magnets, which is which is definitely not what you want to do. So you just want to basically screw it in until you start reaching a little bit of resistance, and that's it. The top deck on the front is secured in place with the magnets, and it's secure in the back with the fastener. And at this point here, the top deck is now secured onto the vehicle. The only thing that needs to be done now, besides me adding the green base coat to the plate over here is I'm actually going to go ahead and sculpt on some weld beads into these locations on the sides. This is something I'm going to be taking care of off camera and will probably be done by the next video update. But regardless, as you can see, the top deck is really looking great, and it's going to look even better once I have the engine deck refitted in place. So after a few coats of the base coat, you can see the top deck has now been fitted in place. At this time here, the rear engine deck has been fitted as well. At this point, the entire top section is now one piece and is firmly and somewhat permanently attached to the vehicle. In order to remove the top decks, very simple, I just remove this fasteners from here. The rear engine deck comes off. Then there's that one little bolt underneath here that's completely concealed, as you can see. And then the entire plate can pop off as well. With the turret fitted in place, the model is currently on, and I could go ahead and freely rotate the turret. As I mentioned before, the turret clears completely the rear engine deck, and most importantly, those new access panels that I mentioned before. Ever so slightly, but definitely clears it, as it does on the real vehicle. Aside from the turret, the rear engine deck area is going through its paintwork. You can see I'm thoroughly painting the inside portions. Attention needs to be painted to the insides prior to the outsides, because obviously there are a lot of little nooks and crannies in there, and it would really be helpful to get that thoroughly painted, because those are the type of things that'll stand out like a sore thumb if the paint is missed. But as you can see, the paint is doing its job just fine. Also, as you can see, the completion of the front deck area is a nice little step forward on this project. And top deck, speaking wise, the only thing that's remaining is this section right over here, which is the cover that covers up the blower, which would be found on the real T34. More information on that is definitely to come. With this step out of the way, I can now focus my efforts on the detailing. And of course, this is the part of these builds that I absolutely love the most and have the most fun with. At the moment, I have a good number of parts that have already been designed, and pictures of the samples can be seen on the EastCoastArmory.com Facebook page. On top of that, I just actually got in the mail a package with a barrage of parts that I recently designed, and those are all going to be affixed to this vehicle in the next video update, which means don't be surprised if another video for this model drops in about a week or so. So definitely stay tuned for the channel for that. And with that, that wraps up this project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek Russian T34 85. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being 1/6 scale project update videos like this one over here, or the other smaller scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build that have been posted since the project start, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by EastCoastArmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Take care.